The second reason why people can't stop binge eating is because they are using willpower or logic or intellectual reasoning to try to think their way out of binge eating. And it's a completely different part of the brain. So we very quickly need to introduce two parts of the brain. First of all, we've got what we call your conscious brain, which uses logic, reasoning, intellectual thought, and analysis. And then we've got your survival brain, which evolved hundreds of millions of years before your conscious brain evolved. And your survival brain operates off emotions, pattern recognition, and associations. It doesn't use logic or intellect. And this is a really useful thing when it comes to your survival. If you step into the road without realizing that there's a bus coming, then you don't want your conscious brain getting in the way with all of its intellectualizing about stuff and analyzing. It's kind of like a committee of old guys that's just going to slow everything down. You want to be jumping out of the way before you even realize what's happening. That's the job of your survival brain. So your survival brain is a very important, very powerful part of your brain that performs many useful functions. However, sometimes we can mistakenly encode it with bits of software, if you like, that are not useful. And that's the case with binge eating. Remember, your survival brain operates off emotions, pattern recognition, and association. So an example of an association is when you smell freshly cut grass or you hear a song from years ago and you immediately get a certain feeling or a certain emotion. And it's very powerful, it's very rapid, it happens automatically without you even thinking about it. Well, it's the same with binge eating. Your survival brain has created an association between binging and your survival. And again, it's fully automatic, it's fully subconscious, and it happens without you even thinking about it. So how did this happen? Well, sometimes these associations get formed purely out of habit. Anytime that you perform any type of thought, any type of belief, or any type of behavior enough times, eventually it becomes a habit because your brain starts to see it as being familiar, and your survival brain likes familiarity. Why? Because it's predictable. If I can predict the future, I now have certainty. I know at least I'm going to survive. So your brain likes to keep things familiar. Your survival brain likes to keep things familiar because familiarity equals survival. So sometimes you've repeated it enough times and it's nothing more than that. It's just a habit. But once it has become ingrained into your survival brain, now it's really difficult to break that habit because that part of your brain sees it as necessary for your survival. However, the vast majority of the time, it's much more than just a habit. It's also born out of using food as a way to regulate your emotions, particularly to escape unpleasant emotions. Typically, for a lot of people, it's things like stress. If you have repeatedly used food to escape stress, then one of the things that your survival brain does is it looks out for threats to protect you from. And one of the things that it's going to use as indications of threats are your emotions. So if you've repeatedly used food as a way to escape stressful emotions, and your brain recognizes the pattern. Remember, pattern recognition is one of its languages. It recognizes the pattern of, I have a threat, I eat some food, and now that threat disappears. So now your brain equates binging to your survival. But in either of these examples, whether this is born purely out of habit or whether it's born from using food to escape stressful emotions, now your survival brain sees food as, or sees binge eating as necessary for your survival. And so your survival brain is going to do whatever it can to keep that habit alive because it's trying to serve you. It thinks that this is necessary for your survival. And it's got all kinds of artful mechanisms that it can use to try to get you to engage with this behavior. Sometimes it's really subtle. It will say things like, go on, give yourself a break, you deserve it. Or perhaps, you know you're gonna binge anyway, so you might as well do it now. And sometimes it's super aggressive. It's like, binge now, if you don't binge now, you're gonna die. It's that kind of intensity, and the cravings and the urges get stronger and stronger and stronger, and it feels like the only way you can get them to shut up is if you give in to them. But this is also why arguing with yourself doesn't work. This is why you can't think your way out of binge eating. This is why I said at the start that people are stuck because they're using things like willpower or logic. They're trying to analyze or calculate their way out of binge eating. It's a completely different part of the brain. Remember, the conscious brain uses logic and intellectual thought and analyzing, but the survival brain, which is the part of the brain in which binge eating is stored, operates off emotions, pattern recognition, and associations. So arguing with yourself, trying to reason with yourself, trying to use logic isn't going to work. That's why many therapies that people go to don't work either, because their approach is to analyze the problem and try to talk your way out of the problem or relive the past. And actually, for many people, they actually end up even more entrenched in the behavior, because now they've got a detailed story about how and why they got stuck, but they remain stuck and it doesn't work. It's using the wrong part of the brain to try to rewire where binge eating is stored. And that's also why willpower doesn't work either. Again, it's a completely different language. It's the wrong language. In fact, willpower often makes binge eating worse. It's kind of like saying, don't think of a black cat. Whoops. Too late, I've already thought of it. If I said to you for the next 60 seconds, your very survival depends on you eliminating 100% of thoughts of black cats from your brain, what are the chances you're going to succeed? You're going to fail miserably because you're going to keep checking to see if it's there. You get more of what you focus on. And so the more you try to tell yourself, do not deviate from the rules, do not deviate one bit, don't eat chocolate, don't think about chocolate, the more you get more of what you focus on. And so using willpower to try to suppress binge eating makes the whole thing worse. That's why many of you have had the experience of the harder I try, the worse it gets. That's why you're using the wrong part of the brain. So we need to start speaking the language of the survival brain, which is emotions, pattern recognition, and associations. Once you start speaking that language, overcoming binge eating is incredibly fast when it's done right. Doesn't need to take a long time. Once you master these skills and you re-educate the survival brain, you have the key to completely, not just developing coping mechanisms to push this into the background, completely and permanently overcome these issues for the rest of your life. But we need to stop making things worse and adding fuel to the fire by trying to argue with ourselves and using the language of the conscious mind to try to rewire the survival brain.